Hello, my friends. Today we have our amazing guest once again. Today we're talking about very interesting topic, which is psychology and basically 6 principles of persuasion. And we're going to talk about very interesting angle. Basically, what is the dark and light side of persuasion or marketing? And we discussed this topic quite a while with Lance, and I want to introduce you his point of view because he's going to talk about how very evil people can use persuasion against you when it's related to the cybersecurity, when it's related to your financial stability. And I'm going to share with you very standard ways how persuasion is going to be used in the marketing. Well, not against you, but help you to buy certain products. So welcome to the show, Lance. So happy to see you once again. And please introduce yourself because not everybody saw our first video. So tell us a little bit more about what you do and how are you overall?
I'm fine, thank you. Very busy. Thank you. My name is Lance Wantenaar, and I work in cybersecurity, but also do financial crime investigations. I also podcast, and that's where I started finding out a lot more about how psychology works. And then that came from a personal interest. And then as I started looking into psychology, I started seeing a lot of corresponding principles come up in cybersecurity. And that's where things became really interesting for me, because once I realized there were some common principles that you could almost transpose, it simplified things, but it also made things very, very easy to understand, because there's a very big disconnect between the two. Once you actually understand that, in essence, that a lot of the cybercrime attacks are basically the same processes that are being used in marketing, it takes on a really interesting dynamic in that aspect. And that allows you to have a much better, you could say, understanding about the behaviors and how that happens, why it happens, and also, just in general, the behaviors that people exhibit when they do any kind of attacks like that. But the other interesting aspect is when you learn about marketing, you get almost like a real life insight into how people are trying to think or directing their attention or their focus and their marketing efforts, and then you try and see if that corresponds in the cyberspace. So it gives you a very almost real-time feed about how people are thinking and approaching things on a day-to-day basis.
Fantastic. And you also did write an article somewhere about
Yes.
that, right?
Yes, that's right. I approached a publishing company to see if they would be interested in it. And my angle was to specifically focus on how these principles of persuasion work within the confines of cyber attacks. So looking, for example, at what the area that I focused on was either email fraud or back fraud. And back fraud is known as business email compromise. It's, in essence, emails that come in that ask for change of bank details. And most of the time, this is a normal financial process. But where it becomes fraudulent is that they provide a fraudster's bank account, and then they target it with a slightly different angle. They either target very high-level individuals impersonating them, emailing into the financial teams, or they'll do actual impersonation attacks. Again, same principles, and some of the attacks are very successful. You're talking about multi-million-dollar losses just from something as simple as a text-based email. And that really was, for me, very interesting to see how something as simple just as a text-based email is, in essence, a $42 billion business, or it has been over the last since 2015 when they started tracking it in real time.
You basically introduced me to the Cialdini Principles of Persuasion, so I know the principles, but not in that format. So today we're going to talk about these 6 principles, and I will just list them as they are, so our viewers also know that there are 6 principles for Persuasion, their reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. And we're going to discuss right now each of this principle.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you like the idea how it's used in marketing. Obviously, you know about that, but we're going to discuss it so that our viewers enjoy it. And I would like to know your angle after that, because I think these principles are very, very familiar to most of our viewers, and they will recognize these principles when they will see the next advertising on TV, when they will visit the shop or things like that. So the study, which I also researched, absolutely fascinating, about liking, for example, the tips for the waiter increased from 3% to 25% if they use likability. So numbers are amazing. Everybody can be persuaded, and obviously it can be dangerous as well. So let's start with reciprocity. We're going now with reciprocity, and this is the first principle, which I personally, when I read about this, I think it's most honest principle, and it was difficult for me to figure out how you can use it against somebody, because in marketing is one of the most honest principles. Basically, it's used for lead magnets, it's used for everything when you get something, little something, and then you feel obliged to give. So also in marketing, we say many times that when your buyer actually can buy something for a small amount, it's the buyer which most likely will buy something more expensive and will be loyal for a brand. So I thought that it's impossible like to hijack this principle, because it's quite honest. And every single time I was looking for these principles, I did write what kind of scarcity or what kind of fears people can potentially have and how people can manipulate it, right? So in this case, I didn't find much fears. But the interesting part, what I was thinking, this is basically the principle which is used in most of financial frauds, I think, and you tell me if I'm right or not, but that's the main principle which is used in the financial pyramids. So basically, and I think therefore it's probably one of the most powerful principles. So tell me more about how this reciprocity principle of persuasion used to manipulate people to give them more money in cybersecurity, you know.
Okay, before I answer that part of the question, what is the key thing about reciprocity?
Good question. To give something little and then like expect something back. Like you invite somebody to a party and you expect these people invite you back. So it's like building connection, building rapport.
Yes, you hit one of the aspects that I wanted to highlight. One is building rapport. Because the key thing with rapport is that you getting the other person engaged. That's why you've got a lead magnet. The whole purpose of a lead magnet is to start the conversation with the other person. By building rapport, you reduce the ability for somebody to be critical or even look at it in almost a cynical fashion, because you lower the barrier of them feeling threatened or feeling on edge. So that's where rapport comes in. That's why a lot of the messaging, if it's done right, builds a customer for a long period of time. If you look at how Apple approaches it, is a really good way. Their whole marketing push, or their whole approach to marketing, is creating a certain amount of exclusivity, but then everything that's marketed around it is presenting a premium product, but having a certain amount of scarcity, but also having a really polished branding experience, so that when somebody gets a product, they've got a really beautiful case. It's an experience to open it up. It's very well packaged. There's very little plastic that goes with it. A lot of the components are either recycled quite significantly, or they make it quite clear that they try and reduce the amount of environmental impact with the components that they're using. So they're using a lot of more environmentally friendly components in their materials. So they create a premium aspect, and that creates a certain amount of trust. And that's the other point that I wanted to highlight. With rapport and reciprocity, you're trying to establish a level of trust. The key thing with trust is that it lowers a person's defenses. Once a person trusts you to a certain amount of, in a certain way, then they're more inclined to either share information, which is a key thing that they're potentially looking for, or they're trying to get the other person to feel obliged to help them because they've either helped them with solving a problem or answered a question, or they've done something to create a level of obligation and debt in the other person. So the key thing with having that rapport built is that once a person starts opening up and they've developed a certain amount of trust, they're less inclined to be critical of a request that comes in because they don't expect that person to be bad, because they've developed some of the other, you could say, social aspects of the contract, like, you know, liking, they've got the trust, they've got the engagement, they know the other person is potentially there to help build a relationship. And that's the key thing, is you try and build up a bit of a relationship to the point where it actually can be engineered into a slightly different way. And that's where the communication part plays a very big key. The challenge with marketing is that it can be a very strong push-based marketing. When you've got the right marketing funnel built, and it feels like the person who's getting you engaged, and they building it out almost as a way of serving you as a customer, instead of you got to buy this, is very high kind of driven marketing, where the other person feels like, yeah, I'm just here to click a button and give you money. When you get the right marketing approach, that the other person trusts you, they're willing to be a long-term customer because they know they're getting value out of it. And if they come back with an issue, you're always going to serve them in the right way. It's slightly different with the fraud scenario, so a cyber scenario. You're trying to build rapport and trust so that the person doesn't feel defensive to the point where you actually get them to submit a request to them. Then they feel obliged to help you because you've generated that goodwill, and you made them feel safe, and you made them feel like that's a non-threatening request. And that's a key thing that happens with the rapport build and the reciprocity process. And reciprocity, as you know, can be something that's quite as simple, because you mentioned the research that they did where the waitress would give the customers a mint and then say, oh, because you're nice customers, here's another mint. And they found that bumped up the tip level by
30%. And if they get out and then they get back and say, this is another mint for you especially, it's increased for 25%. That was interesting data, actually, like 13% if you just give 2 mints instantly, and like, you know, from 3 to 13, and like, you know, 25 if you just move out and move back. So it's really
and that's a novelty aspect that comes in, because it's a surprise. And that's where the kind of dopamine, the pleasure aspect comes in. Ooh, it's, you know, I didn't expect that. And you know, that's a way that you generate that rapport and that goodwill. Once you've got goodwill, the other person feels more inclined to be generous back to you, because you've been generous. It could either be with a compliment or with a surprise. And that's a really interesting dynamic if you think about it. I've not yet seen that exactly in an email form, but you can sometimes see it with telephone conversations. One telephone conversation, the caller was just out of the blue mentioned to the other person on the other line, is, you got such a lovely voice. It was first thing it was said, just out of the blue. And the person was so surprised and felt so complimented about it that the rest of the call was easy. They got whatever they wanted out of that call, just due to the fact of complimenting them.
I remember in 90s there was like a very popular fraud on the streets when they were like asking you to do something. Eventually it ended up you give all your money, but they started with complimenting you how smart you are. based on whatever offer they suggest, and like you can choose something, etc., etc., and then they complimenting you how smart you are and this and that, and you feel really like, you know, appreciated, and then you give them all the money. You did. So, I know it works.
Yeah, but that's a simple, really simple rule of reciprocity. Reciprocity is about making the person feel good and make them feel trusted and make them feel safe.
Basically, it's the worst part of fraud, because basically people trying to connect with you on a very, very honest level.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But of an interesting
we don't like it. Let's go to the next one. Alrighty, so our second principle, not our Cialdini's, is commitment. And that's interesting principle because, you know, I'm all about branding, and I think this principle is all about branding, right? So we're talking about the values, we're talking about people resonate with the content or with our message or with our vision, perhaps. So commitment is really, really important because, for example, in marketing, we often say that you need to be committed to specific dates when you post your videos on YouTube, so people feel comfortable, people build that loyalty, and people build the expectations, which is potentially make them feel safe to trust you again. And commitment is again, building rapport, building trust. People know that it will happen eventually. For example, all TV programs which come in a specific time and they offer specific experience make people feel comfy, especially if they do evening drinking chips or whatsoever kind of near TV series. It builds a lot more connection to the specific channel, to Netflix or something like that. So that's how it works in marketing. And obviously it's way, way deeper, but it's like, when I speak about brands, there is a saying or research that people build relationships with brands in exact same way as they build relationships with people. So the expectations are approximately the same. People expect that brands will be loyal back to them. So it's like connection on everything, like how we choose friends, of course, based on our values, based on our message, like how we connect with people and things like that. So tell me more about how bad people use it against other people to take their money and all the things. So how it used in cybersecurity and all.
Okay, that's an interesting angle. I'm going to focus more on the consistency aspect of commitment. When I started reading through Cialdini's book, his main one that really got me into this, which is his Psychology of Persuasion, one of the areas that he was talking about was consistency and how it was used during the Korean War and the Vietnam War with some of the American POWs. And what they did is that China was in charge of one of the prison camps, and they got some of the American prisoners to state that some of the actions that the United States took was not 100% correct. They started with a small statement, which was an acceptance that, you know, everything was not always correct. So why did they do it that way? First of all, they got the POW to admit that not everything is 100% correct. Not everything is 100% right. What does that do? It starts off the engagement process, but it also gets the person to verbally state that nothing is 100% correct, that they're not morally and always the correct way, their decision is not always correct. It can be a very ambiguous statement and it can be very widely stated, which gets the other person to start engaging. The whole thing with that was to get the engagement started, but also to get the verbal confirmation. Now, what it means is that you've got almost like an anchor point that the person has stated it, which means you can go back and always reference that. And then with those reference points, they started working out ways of, you could say, undermining more and more of the confidence and the thought patterns and the belief systems and the identity that the POWs had. So it was an entry point. And then what they said, okay, can you write it down as a statement what you believe? Now, this was very subtle, but it was also very, very damaging, because now what it does is a written statement is proof, because you've verbally admitted it, but now because you've written it down, you've physically stated this as fact. And now what they're doing is that you can quote it back and say, but you wrote this. What that does is that confirms the information, and that puts you in a psychological locked position. You have to carry on committing to that phrase because you've written it down. It's very difficult psychologically for a person to be able to process information that are two different opposing thought patterns or approaches or belief systems. It's known as I'm trying to think of the phrase now, but because you've got two different or opposing belief systems, it's very difficult for a person to process that, because you have to think about it very, very carefully. And when you think about two of these opposing things, it becomes very, very tiring. That's why when people lie, and they lie a lot, the information is not true, but then this fabrication that you build up is very difficult to maintain over a period of time, unless you're a very, very proficient liar that can switch almost instantaneously and carry it off. It's very difficult for people to do it. It's called psychological dissonance. So it's just that discomfort that somebody has when there's two opposing belief systems in their thoughts, and that makes it really very difficult. So what people prefer to do is that they have one single statement that they believe is true, that they say is true, and they either state it and write it. Once it's stated and written, then you're more inclined to carry through with that statement. That's why you have a contractual agreement. The contractual agreement is, this is a stated agreement that we've got between us. And by signing the agreement, you are verbally, but also psychologically taking on that responsibility that this is the true statement, and you're going to oblige by the agreement. If you break out of that agreement, there's a penalty. And that's part of the whole social contract. If you suddenly change your story, it removes that level of trust that you have in the other person. So by getting the person to state it as a matter of commitment, it means that you can actually get the person to carry on confirming they were going to do it, and carrying on confirming that they're going to continue on supporting and making a decision, unless it gets to a point where there's so many red flags and danger signals that come up that the person says, sorry, I'm not doing it anymore. But you can still use that to rework the person by using this whole commitment aspect, and by pulling them back to the actual agreement. And that's why agreements are so powerful, is because once an agreement is in place, especially a signed agreement, it's very difficult to break out of it, because there's a penalty involved, whether it's a financial penalty or there's a psychological penalty, that people can claim that you're a liar. And invariably, people don't like being called liars or dishonest or anything else, because as a tenant, most people are not dishonest. It's just because of this disagreement that the situation has changed. But if someone is dishonest and they do break it, then there's a consequence to coming out of the agreement. So that's why commitment, and that's why I look more of it from a consistency basis. Because if you've got somebody that's that's stated that they're going to do something and say, okay, yes, I'll transfer the money. Now that you can go back to them and you can keep on badgering them and saying to them, you need to do this. And that's part of the reason why you've got a lead magnet and you've got the funnel is built out in a way to get the person to start purchasing. Because once you get that consistent behavior built into a person that they're going to purchase something and they're going to accept the communications, unless it gets to a point where the marketing that comes out is opposing their ideas and what they feel is they're comfortable with, where they unsubscribe or they stop buying the product, they will carry on building a relationship with the other brand. And that's where the whole relationship building aspect comes into play. More the nurture of the relationship and you make the person feel safe, the less inclined that they're going to change their mind and actually break out of this social agreement.
You're always focusing on marketing way more.
Yeah. So how it's used is through having an email conversation or maybe having a verbal conversation. They start off and saying, look, can you help me with this request? And if you reply back, yes, I can help you. What is it? What is the situation? Because you've committed to saying, yes, you can help. They'll say, look, I've got this problem. I don't know how to solve it. Now what you're doing is that you're putting the onus on the person that you're targeting with. I need to help this problem solved. Can you help me? Do you have the authority to do this? If you say yes, then it puts you into that contractual agreement that you're going to help them. And now what it does, it gets you to take the next step of, okay, I'll help you. Even if you're not supposed to be doing it, then you start doing it and you start getting engaged and you start answering questions. And once you start answering questions and you start engaging more and more, it pulls you into that whole scenario where you get taken advantage of. I mean, we spoke about it previously, where street confidence artists would come up and compliment you and then build up that whole rapport situation. And once a person's engaged and you're saying, oh, this is nice, and you start that conversation, that whole commitment and that rapport building and trust building process takes you down the road because you're engaging, you're being involved. And it gets to the point where you take the next step. It's slightly different when it comes to a phishing link, because phishing links can be used in that way, because you can use impersonation like branding and everything else to make it look like as in, for example, an Amazon or any of the big brand marketing emails. And then it's like you've received, or it could be a banking one, you've received a $100 gift card voucher. Please click on the link to claim this. And you think, oh, this is nice. Let me click on this link because I've got an Amazon account, and let me claim this voucher. Now what it does is it's using that consistent branding that people recognize to actually get you to take a decision that you would normally not do. And it ties into the novelty aspect, which we were talking about earlier. And that gets for somebody surprised. Oh, I didn't expect that. I could really use $100 to buy some groceries or buy some nappies or whatever it is that you need at that time. And you don't suspect it because they're using a certain amount of trust to then get you to make a mistake.
Different cases, but I'm like, moving in my mind these stories, and I'm like, nope. That's not commitment, that's likability. Nope, that's social proof. So, I'll not give examples because of that, because I move them in different categories and I will give them later. So, our next point is actually social proof. And I think social proof is actually very interesting. And just a little back to commitment, I also noted that what issues are usually targeted by people who try to use you with these methods is need of stability and desire of security. So basically, we have a very strong needs as human beings. We need to feel safe, we need to feel stable, and that's where commitment is tapping into this. So if you have this potential fears, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel have abandonment issues or something like that, your psychology will potentially push you into these traps. And I'm going to give more of these ideas about the potential fears with the other aspects. So Social proof.
Yes.
So basically, social proof is that what others doing, and it's very interesting thing because you can use it in so many ways. I mean, I don't know. I'm very excited when I'm speaking about that frauds and stuff like that. I don't know why. Maybe I'm internally Moriarty or something like that. So basically the desired action with the social proof is to act logically and emotionally. So we actually talking about the logical brain, right? So it's like, it's proven fact that it's a good idea to follow whatever. And related issues, which I stated, is the sense of belonging. It's following the crowd because everybody else doing that. And again, the need of external validation, which is a big thing. So when we talk about the social proof, it can be credentials for people, right? So we say that, okay, that person belonged to the group of that people, and that people prove that that person is legit. Like when we talk about coaches, when we talk about authors, when we talk about teachers. If you talk about universities, like if it is like Ivy League or something like this, they belong to a certain level of society. Or social proof with, for example, having a car which is complete Vanity Fair, like you have Ferrari or something like that, and that said a certain statement that you belong to that and so society and things like that. So social proof can be really powerful thing, very honest in many cases, like having PhD, MD or whatsoever letters in your business card, definitely giving people an idea that you have a certain level of education. So again, it's a social proof. For the brand, social proof can be the benefit or the testimonials which people give to this brand. So basically other people experience, right? So again, it's pretty honest thing in a way, right? So we're dealing again with another very good thing. And personally, I can say how it used a lot in sales because I did use it. That's a funny thing because many times, because I have art background, and in art there is no much of social proof, to be honest, and a lot of things are made of, I'm saying something which nobody will like, but it's true. And I remember when I was a student, I was selling a very large painting. And basically it was a service. So we were creating this painting, and the client wanted something like on the table. And I told them that, as everybody knows, based on the composition rules created by so-and-so person, totally made up surname, this has to be in the right corner of the painting. And these two people looked at me and they say, yeah, of course you know these principles, I asked them. They're like, of course we know. I'm like, wow. So it was totally made up principle. So I sold it the way I wanted, because I didn't want to draw it on a table. I wanted to draw something else. It was better for composition, but I just needed a point why that will be in a corner and that will be on a table. So yeah, that's pretty much social proof and fraudery. Yeah, so tell me more about how it's actually used in a cybersecurity and to get people's money, because I was very fair. I delivered the painting, so it was not a fraud.
That example that you gave is a really good example of how social proof can be used even in cybersecurity. It can be, again, either phishing email. Example that I'm going to give is something that probably a lot of people have already done in previous occasions. There are many of these Facebook quizzes that would come out with, what is your Jedi Master rating or whatever? Your friend Joe's taken it and he's a Yoda, or what are you? And they ask a bunch of random questions, but when you actually break down the questions that they're asking, it has a lot of relevance to personal information. And say, what would your mother's Yoda name or Jedi name be? What will your what's your favorite movie, and Star Wars movie, and what it does, it creates a massive profile of the person as they start answering questions. And then you get some kind of validation. Oh, you're a Yoda Jedi, just like so and so. Now, because they've used that social proof of what other friends are this type of character, now it makes you feel special because you're this type of person, puts you in a specific kind of a group, regardless of the fact that you've just given away all of your personal details and information to somebody that you don't really know, and there's no proof that the information is going to be correctly dealt with and handled with. And what they found out is that many of these quizzes were scraping so much personal information that information was all being collated and then used in phishing attacks at a later stage. And now it can be even worse. In certain cases, what they do is that they take some of the data breaches that happened before and they send out a random email. It's just like, your password, your name and email and whatever was found on, this website. You need to pay me so much in Bitcoin, or you need to do this, or we'll publish your information online. And there was one website, I'm trying to think of the website. It was one of the adult websites. They used an extortion approach. By using social proof, your account was on this site. If you don't give us money, we're going to publish your information and we're going to tell your friends, your family, and your wife. And the extreme cases, some people actually committed suicide because of it. In other cases, it caused significant, collateral damage because of the way that this all happened. But the other aspect of it is they were successfully able to defraud people. And that's how social proof can be used to target people and to extort people. And that's why it comes back down to the previous talk that we did as well. I talk about digital footprint and digital identity and how much information is being shared. And when it gets to that situation, you can try and cover it up, but that's never going to work because most of the time these people are very, very cruel in what they'll do. And you've just got to go down the road of either not responding or take it on the chin. Just accept it, be open and honest about it, admit something, and just deal with the consequences as soon as possible. Because if you try and hide it, the problem is that they can then carry on blackmailing you over an extended period of time. And that is what's happened. It's the same thing that's happened with a lot of ransomware cases where people have been targeted. Once they know that a company has paid again or they paid before, they will retarget them because they know they're going to get potentially more money out of them. They're just remarketing the same company, just like what they do in normal marketing. They just retarget the same victim. And that's the same thing that happens with the extortion cases. They will retarget the same people because they've paid before, because they've used the same process. And because you've already paid, you already spent money, you've already tried to hide that fact, they know they can use that manipulation to carry on milking it until it gets to a point where it's too much. So that's a really dark side of social proof and how it's worked.
I want to guide our viewers to, first of all, watch the video which we created before about digital footprint, that's for sure. I also want them to check all the links below and in the description, because in this part, we're going to finish our first video and you're going to watch the next part next time. So thank you so much, Lance, and we're going to create that second video and people will enjoy it too. And I'm also going to make a combination of two videos for those who really want to have a smooth experience. However, watch all the links in the description below. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.